The other day I heard a man say that he is really struggling with the level of suffering in the world. And pour my heart out to him, but as I listened on, I realized that he wasn't talking about suffering. He was talking about pain. So I thought I should make a video and discuss the difference between pain and suffering. You must be thinking, well, what on earth is the difference between pain and suffering, Emerald? And quite simply, the difference is that you can be in a great deal of pain and completely free of suffering at the same time. However, when you are suffering, it is accompanied by pain. What do I mean? There is this great Buddhist story about this exact topic, the difference between pain and suffering, and it goes something like this. So extreme paraphrasing, but it goes something like this. Say you were shot with an arrow in the shoulder. Somebody was playing with a crossbow. You ended up with an arrow in your shoulder. Hopefully, your initial reaction would be to scream and swear and cry and get help. I mean, that's what any sane person would do. I don't know. There's some people who really apply themselves to being able to handle physical pain with so much grace. I'm not one of those people, so I would swear and cry and rush to the hospital, and I think that's a completely natural reaction. And I think the Buddhists who gave us the story would agree with that. That's the first arrow, and that is pain. Suffering is the second arrow. The second arrow is not another arrow penetrating your skin. It is a mental arrow. It is keeping the arrow in your shoulder long after the doctors pulled it out. It is resisting what has happened by thinking things like, why does this happen to me? I wish I hadn't been in this place at this particular time. Oh, I'm so dumb. Why would I walk in front of archers anyway? You know, it's, I deserve better than this. It's, this shouldn't be happening right now. That's the second arrow. That's twisting the first arrow inside of you. And that's what creates the tension and the resistance to what has already happened. Fact of the matter is, you have an arrow in your shoulder. Now you gotta go with the moment. Now you have to just move for what the moment calls for. But it's not gonna help to sit around going, oh, I wish this hadn't happened to me. That's not gonna pull the arrow out your shoulder. That's not gonna get you medical attention. That's not gonna save your life. That's not gonna do anything except make your thoughts spiral in a moment where you should probably remain calm, right? And this particular story came in very handy for me during a situation just like this. I had hurt my right shoulder, elbow, wrist, neck, lower back, all in one shot, doing some funky kung fu move. Don't ask me about it. Ask me about it if you want to. I'll tell you why on earth I thought it was a good idea, but not on this video. The point is, I absolutely stuffed up the whole right side of my body. Now, I was the kind of kid that would be sitting in trees watching the world, you know, pass by me when I should have been doing my homework, and while my cousins were like playing video games and stuff. And I was constantly in braces and casts and, you know, receiving medical attention for some sprain or broken bone or fracture or whatever. So when this happened to me, I was like, oh, here we go, you know, and I, quite frankly, I dismissed it. And as the day went on, it went from, oh, I think this is a sprain, to the whole right side of my body is out, to maybe I should rest a little bit, but I'm gonna play guitar, to my spirit guide starting to zap me on my head, like zap me, like electrocute me on my head, forcing me to pay attention to what was going on in my body. And a few hours later, I deteriorated to the point where I couldn't move. I was in so much pain, and I realized it was nerve related because I had this heat in this whole region here, and sharp pain is just jolting through my arm right into my thumb, and I was starting to lose function of my hand. I contacted a neurologist, and I'd have to wait a little while to see him. And the next day, I didn't want to eat. I could barely move. I was just lying on my left side, afraid that any move I made would result in paralysis or something. I had no idea what I'd done, and I was very, very worried at this point. And shame, my grandfather was walking in every 20 minutes to change my ice. Because I was just like rotating ice on different regions of my body. And while I was lying in my bed, I was trying to calm down, but I started having a bit of a panic attack. I thought that I'd reached the point where I was okay. I didn't need to continue living. You know, I didn't need anything out of life. Nothing's guaranteed, and I was at peace with that. And lying there in that moment, despite how grateful I am for my life and for my body, and, you know, for the ability to move and how much I express that, I felt like I'd taken everything for granted. And in a moment, I could just lose everything. My ability to play my instruments, my ability to write and make music, my ability to do yoga, and the exercises I love to do, and swim, and you name it. And everything was just like running through my head. Like, is this it? I don't get to use my right arm anymore, you know, and I was kind of having a panic attack, and I couldn't move. So, you know, like, I'm tense, and I shouldn't be tense, and I'm, you know, spiraling. And the next thing, I just remember something Alan Watts had said. I don't remember exactly what he said, but I remembered something he had said. And I realized that I was resisting the moment, and it was making the whole situation worse. So I took a deep breath, and I accepted where I was. It didn't mean that if for some reason things had gotten so bad that I wouldn't have said, no, you know, I'm gonna stay here, or something like that if I needed to go to the hospital. Nothing like that. Nothing like denial or being unreasonable or anything like that. It was more just like accepting what had happened and accepting where I was. Because while I was lying there, all I could think was, I wish this wasn't happening to me. I really wish I could just be doing what I'd usually be doing at this time of the evening. I'm such an idiot. I can't believe how dumb I've been. I wish I could turn back time. You know, and wishing that you could turn back time and do something differently when you can't, and you're lying there and you're working yourself up around these kinds of thoughts like, is this it? You know, this is the last time I can use my hand. No. If it was, it would have been awful, but sitting there and letting it spiral before I know, that doesn't help. You know, like if it was a passing thought and I had to for a moment consider that might be what happens, fine. But then let that be a passing thought and let it go. Don't fixate on it and tense up and start to panic, you know, because if that is what's going to happen, then panicking is not going to change it. You know, if it's the kind of situation where the doctors can't help and that's what's happened, then it's time to just go with what life has become, and resisting life is not going to change it. And I realize that, and I sort of go, okay. And in that moment, when I accept where I am, I feel the tension in my body release, and I start to calm down, and I realize that most of the anguish I was feeling in that moment was coming from my psychological states, not from my body, as shitty of a position as I was in that moment. I calmed down enough to put on an Alan Watts podcast and just relax and fall asleep. And this sort of sets me up to handle the rest of this journey with my arm in a different way. You know, driving to the hospital, which is 2 hours away, and going into hospital, and the discomfort and the worry and all of that is still there. But it's like you have worry, but it doesn't eat at you. So it comes and it goes, and the pain, it comes and it goes. And when you're not perpetuating it, because you're sort of in the state of acceptance, like worry is a part of this process, and you're aware that you're worrying, and then you're like, okay, and then you're not worrying anymore because you're so self-aware of the position you're in and your mental state that you're able to just breathe out and go with it. I mean, you're not in pain. Doesn't mean you don't have the occasional worry. Doesn't mean that it's not uncomfortable. I absolutely hated being in the hospital room I was in. I love being outdoors and in the sunlight, and I'm ADHD, so I like to move about and all of that. And I had to sit dead still all the time. There was no sun, no windows in the hospital room I was in. And I didn't know when it was night or day unless I looked at the clock, and I felt so deeply for the people who had to stay there after I was released, because I was only there for a few days, you know, and then the rest of my treatment was outside of the hospital. So, was I uncomfortable? Yes. I'm a clairvoyant. And there was actually a moment while I was in the hospital where I spiraled again, you know, and I started panicking a bit. And I got out of bed and I started wanting to clean and pace around and stuff. And my Omi, who has passed on, said to me, my girl, get into bed and rest. And I got into bed. Calmed down. I came back to, you know, a state of awareness. So I'm not even saying that, oh, you should be able to maintain it the whole time through a difficult situation, but I think it comes about with practice. You know, if you're living your life that way, when life does throw you a curveball, you know, like that situation with me you're just able to handle it with so much more grace, for lack of a better word. Now, I think it's important to establish what I'm essentially getting at here. I was in pain, first and foremost, but when I was holding on to what may or may not happen and resisting what has already happened, in that moment you could classify that as suffering. You know, being in a state of regret is not going to change what has happened. Regret serves its purpose. Let it come, let it go. But don't dwell in it past its due date, you know? Otherwise, you're just causing yourself unnecessary suffering. And I identified this in that moment. So I was able to let it go because regret was not going to change what had happened. The same is with the worry and the anticipation of the future and the anxiety I felt for a moment. That's warranted and it serves its purpose. It's a natural reflex, right? But if you stay there longer than you need to, now you're doing more damage than good. It came through to serve its purpose, maybe to bring your awareness to something so that you could act in accordance with the moment. But once you've established that you need to do something or not do something, let it go, right? It served its purpose. That anxiety, that momentary fear served its purpose. And for example, with me, I realized I needed to go see the neurologist, right? The anxiety, it served its purpose. Now I'm going to the neurologist. I'm getting medical treatment. I'm doing everything I possibly can to, you know, deal with the situation. There's no longer a need for me to carry anxiety and fear of the future into it, because if the doctors can't help me and I end up in a position that, well, is, you know, a life sentence for, then that's what it is. Then it's coming to accept that, right? And dwelling in regret or resisting the moment is not going to change that. So you just gotta let go. You know, you do what you can, and then you accept that that's what life is in that moment. And that's the difference. If you're able to accept where you are, no matter what it is, whether it's high or low, then you can navigate the highs and lows of life, which present themselves as pain and pleasure, and I suppose, you know, neutral ground. But you can navigate that without being consumed by the experience itself, because all things are anicca. They're all temporary. Which brings me to the doctrine, perhaps not the best word, but doctrine that helped me establish this point of view, that has made my worst moments these days better than my best moments a few years ago. And that's Buddhism. So I think the best way to explain what suffering is through the Buddhist point of view. So the Buddha begins his doctrine with life is suffering, and the word suffering that is used, the Sanskrit word is dukkha, and that means bitter, right? Contrast with sukha, which is similar to our word for sugar, sweetness. So life is bitterness, it's suffering, it's uncomfortable. And us humans, we we don't like that. We don't like pain. We don't like discomfort. And we can't help it because we're biologically wired to survive. And the thing is, pleasurable experiences evolved over many years to help us survive, and the same is true with painful experiences. They sort of serve their purpose, but it comes with this little catch called the human condition. Without getting too deep into the weeds, let's move on to the next noble truth. That was the first noble truth: life is suffering. The second noble truth is that life is suffering because you cling to what is temporary, because you're attached to what we call change. Everything is change, right? We're all in time. What is time? A measure of change. So everything's change, everything is flux, and that's that word anicca I used a few moments ago. It's change. The thing is, we attach dearly to our bodies, to our loved ones, to moments like being on a stage in front of a crowd full of people, to that moment we receive that award and we're standing up in front of, the assembly or whatever. We attach dearly to these moments, to these temporary things, and because they don't last, we suffer. We suffer because everything's changed, and we're attached to them. And that's, a few examples of attachment to pleasurable things, but we also attach to painful things. We resist the inevitable. We don't want to die. No one wants to die. We're hardwired to survive, right? So we put ourselves through a great deal of unnecessary suffering by trying to avoid death. I saw this guy the other day that his whole campaign is don't die, and I just had to giggle because it's inevitable. But we literally pour billions and billions and billions of dollars into trying to live longer, or at least look younger while we're alive. The youth and beauty industries, and I just giggle just because you're resisting the inevitable. You can maybe prolong your life a little bit and if everything plays out best case scenario, it might work out for you. But resisting the inevitable is just a futility. We do this because of avidya. Now, vidya means sight or seeing in Sanskrit. So avidya means not seeing clearly. So we attach to experiences which are temporary. This attachment is actually called trishna, which is essentially thirst. So we're thirsty, we're hungry, we've got all these desires. The desire to not die, the desire to live longer, the desire to be prettier, the desire to have many great moments, the desire to sustain the high of life. We just want the rushes and the excitement and the great experiences, especially in the West, where it's a hedonistic culture. And that leads to a lot of suffering because everybody's chasing the next high and resisting the inevitable, that every high is followed by a low, right? Which then brings me to the third noble truth, which is the good news. And that is that there is a cure, and the cure is seeing clearly. And when you see clearly, you breathe out. You just sigh with relief. And that's nirvana. Nirvana literally means blow out. So, like, I'm so relieved. Like, I didn't realize that life could look this way, you know. So the cure is a point of view. It's not a place. It's not something outside of yourself. It's a perspective. Now, the Buddha, being a very practical man, doesn't expect you to somehow just arrive at this perspective. He lays out a whole way to reach this perspective. He gives you a prescription. So he identified the problem, the illness, and then he identified the reason for the illness, and then he, you know, says, well, there must be a cure for it, and sure enough, there's a way to treat the illness and be cured. And that is the eightfold path. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into that. That'll maybe be another video. But what I want to just highlight here is that suffering is a point of view, according to Buddhism. And I would agree. That means that not suffering, liberation, ascension is a point of view, not a place, not a different world, a point of view of this world, of this moment, of yourself, of right now. And it's different from pain, because it's not about not having pain anymore. It's about how you view pain, right? It's not about being free of pain. It's about not resisting it when it's there. And so, bringing me back to the reason I started this video, the man who said that he wanted to, you know, alleviate human suffering, because there's so much suffering in the world. In his words, I could hear he was suffering because he has the wrong view, you know. And that's literally the second noble truth, is not seeing clearly. Now, before you jump on me here, I'm not saying you shouldn't want to alleviate human pain. I want to alleviate human pain. I'm an empath. If you've watched this far, you probably are too. And if you want to alleviate human pain, then be my guest. Just know that that's what you want. I'm just trying to establish that there's a difference between pain and suffering. Okay? People can be in horrific situations and not be suffering. An example of this actually came, you know, I can talk on an example from World War II. There are instances in there were instances in the concentration camps where people would just have this psychological breakthrough, where even though they were in this horrific circumstance, they felt free. They just let go, and they were able to accept it, and they felt like they were part of the whole happening that is, you know, existence, life. And this tends to happen when people have bombs, you know, well, planes circling above their houses, not knowing if a bomb is going to fall in their house, or they're stuck in a really awful situation. These sort of transcendental insight moments tend to happen in states of severe suffering. Not always, and not for everyone, but every now and again it does happen. And so you could be sitting there and having, the plane circle above your house, and, hearing the bombs go off around you. And instead of being in this deep-seated, fearful state, just in a state of acceptance, because you know that no level of fear or anxiety or resistance at the moment is going to change what is about to happen next. If the bomb hits your house, it hits your house right in that moment. And that kind of insight can help you let go. So you might be in pain, maybe you haven't eaten for days, maybe you're in a siege or something. You're still in pain, but not necessarily suffering. And that's the key difference here. If you want to alleviate human suffering, you have to free yourself of suffering. You have to gain the Buddha's point of view. You have to see things clearly. You need to be able to walk the middle way. You need to be able to see that all of this chaos is harmony, and then still be a part of it, still move in accordance with it. That's what the Bhagavad Gita tells us. But you move in such a way that you're detached from the fruits of your actions, and you're not consumed by the experience, and your horses aren't dragging you around, so you're able to be conscious in experience. So that doesn't mean you don't move to alleviate human pain. You don't move to balance, the inequalities or, the state of things in the world. It doesn't mean any of that. If that's what you feel called to do, then that is most likely what you should do, and you've got to discern what your dharma is, what your way is. That only you know. And it's beyond good and evil, and it's beyond right or wrong. It's your way. But you can only alleviate human suffering if you yourself have come to see things from such a perspective that you're not suffering. Because it doesn't mean reducing human pain physically. It doesn't mean anything like that. It means being able to shift people's points of view. Okay? So, for example, say you have reached a point of view where you can say that you're no longer in a state of suffering, that life comes with its highs and its lows, and you just sail on the water. You just go with it. And the winds of life come, and you're like a candle that can't be blown out. Then you can go into, say, a really disastrous situation, like my spirit guys didn't like that use of words there. They're like, and I was like, that was the pause. So let me rephrase. You can go into a situation where you have no money, and you can't necessarily, say, affect things in a very crude way. Like, maybe you're just one person and you can't treat everybody in a hospital, right? But you can share your point of view, and there's a chance that there will be people that are ready to have that perspective shift. And so you would alleviate human suffering without necessarily removing them from their state of being, without necessarily healing their sickness or feeding them, say if it's like a starvation situation, whatever it is. Let's stay with that hospital example. That person might die there later that day, but just before they do, you may have relieved their suffering. And so the end of suffering does not necessarily mean the end of pain, and it certainly does not mean that You know, everything becomes heaven, because heaven is a point of view, you know. What it essentially comes down to is a point of view. So if you want to move to alleviate pain, please be my guest. We need people like that. We need as many people like that as possible. We need people who are going to give, and they'll give themselves, give their time, give their resources to helping alleviate human pain. But distinguish that from suffering, because in order to alleviate human suffering, you need to have a point of view that allows you to do so. And that comes from doing the inner work. That comes from working on yourself. And what that comes down to is the greatest gift you can give the world is by doing the work on yourself. And then once you have come to see things from a point of view that is synonymous with inner peace, and collectively experienced would be the definition of harmony, then you're in a position to alleviate human suffering. I think that's all for this evening. Much love to you guys. If you enjoyed this, let me know in the comment section. Give this video a like, subscribe to my channel. It's my first video, and yeah, till next time.